The grand estate was buzzing with excitement. It was the wedding day of a billionaire's only daughter, and everyone who mattered was there. The venue looked like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, soft. Music played in the background, and guests dressed in their finest clothes mingled happily. Champagne flowed freely, laughter filled the air, and everything seemed perfect. This was supposed to be the happiest day for the bride and groom, but no one could have guessed what was about to happen. Just as the ceremony was about to begin, a sudden commotion broke out near the entrance. People turned their heads to see a young man walking in, completely out of place among the wealthy crowd. He wore worn-out jeans and a hoodie that had seen better days. But what really caught everyone's attention was the baby he held close to his chest, wrapped snugly in a blanket. The room fell silent as all eyes fixed on him. Security guards quickly moved toward the intruder, ready to escort him out. But before they could act, he raised his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I need to talk to her," he shouted, pointing toward the bride at the altar. His tone was urgent, almost desperate. "She needs to know this is her child." Gasps echoed through the room. Some people covered their mouths in shock, while others leaned forward, eager to hear more. The cameras that had been set up to capture the beautiful moments of the wedding now focused entirely on this unexpected guest. What was going on? Who was this stranger claiming to have a connection to the bride? And how could someone so young and seemingly ordinary dare to crash such an exclusive event? The billionaire father of the bride wasted no time. With a stern expression, he marched down the aisle, his expensive suit making him stand out even more against the chaos. He stopped inches away from the young man, glaring at him with undisguised anger. "Who are you?" he bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "How dare you come here and disrupt my daughter's special day?" The young man didn't flinch. Instead, he took a deep breath and began explaining himself. He said he used to be involved with the bride years ago when she was still in college. Back then, she wasn't surrounded by luxury or privilege. She was just another student trying to make ends meet. According to him, they had shared something real, a relationship built on trust and dreams for the future. But things changed when she suddenly disappeared without a word. She left behind not just memories but also a secret. She was pregnant. He went on to explain that after she vanished, he found himself alone, struggling to raise their child by working multiple jobs. Life hadn't been easy, but he did his best to provide for the little one. Now, however, things were getting harder, and he felt it was time for the truth to come out. That's why he showed up uninvited, to give the child a chance to meet his mother. Holding the baby closer, he added, "Look at him, he looks just like her." The bride stood frozen at the altar, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her bouquet. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted between the baby and the man holding him. Was this true? Could she really have a child she never knew about? Her mind raced as she tried to piece together fragments of her past. Memories of late-night conversations, stolen kisses, and whispered promises came flooding back, but they were blurry, distant. Had she made a mistake all those years ago? Or was this some kind of cruel prank? Her mother fainted into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the revelation, while the groom-to-be looked visibly shaken. The atmosphere in the room shifted from celebration to tension in an instant. Whispers grew louder as people speculated about what would happen next. Would the bride deny the claim? Would the wedding continue as planned? No one knew, but every single person present couldn't take their eyes off the unfolding drama as the situation spiraled out of control. The bride finally spoke. Her voice trembled as she struggled to find the right words. This can't be true," she stammered, shaking her head slowly. Yet, despite her denial, doubt lingered in her eyes. Deep down, a part of her wondered if the young man was telling the truth. Could this baby truly be hers? The tension in the room was palpable. Every person waited anxiously for the next move. Little did they know, this moment would change lives forever, not just the bride's, but everyone's involved. As the room buzzed with whispers and shocked reactions, the bride's father stepped forward again, his face red with anger. He wasn't about to let this stranger ruin what was supposed to be the most important day of his family's life. "You think you can just waltz in here with some wild story?" he snapped, pointing a finger at the young man. "Do you have any proof? Or are you just trying to cause trouble?" The young man didn't back down. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a stack of faded papers and photos. His hands shook slightly as he held them up for everyone to see. "I don't need to prove anything to you," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "But if you want proof, here it is." He began laying out the evidence on a nearby table, spreading the items so the bride, and anyone else who cared to look, could see them clearly. There were old photographs showing him and the bride together during happier times. In one picture, they were sitting on a park bench, laughing like there was no care in the world. Another showed them studying late at night in a dimly lit library, books scattered across the table. These weren't staged images. They were real moments captured between two people who had once shared something meaningful. But the photos weren't all he had. He also produced text messages printed out on paper, screenshots of conversations that painted a vivid picture of their relationship. Some messages were lighthearted jokes, others were heartfelt confessions, and a few hinted at plans for the car future. One particular exchange stood out. She had written, "Things might get tough, but we'll figure it out together." At the time, those words must have felt like a promise. Now they seemed like a painful reminder of what could have been. Then came the final piece of evidence, a hospital bracelet from the day the baby was born. The tiny plastic band bore the name of the newborn alongside the date and time of birth. It was undeniable proof that the child existed and that the young man had been present when he entered the world. As he placed the bracelet on the table, his eyes locked onto the bride's. "You can deny it all you want," he said softly, almost pleading now. "But deep down, you know it's true." The bride stared at the items spread out before her, her heart pounding in her chest. Each photo, each message, each tiny detail tugged at memories she had buried long ago. She remembered those days, the laughter, the dreams, the promises. But she also remembered the pressure she had felt back then. Her father had always pushed her to focus on her education and career, telling her that success was the only thing that mattered. When she discovered she was pregnant, panic set in. She convinced herself she wasn't ready, that having a child would derail everything she had worked so hard for. So she made a choice, one she thought was best at the time, but now, standing there facing the consequences of that decision, she wasn't so sure anymore. Her knees grew weak, and she stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the altar for support. Her mother, who had regained consciousness after fainting earlier, rushed to her side, whispering urgently, "Say something. Tell him he's lying." But the bride couldn't speak. Her mind was racing, torn between disbelief and guilt. Could this really be happening? The groom-to-be, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but laced with tension. "This changes everything," he said, looking directly at the bride. "If what he's saying is true, then—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. His political career, his reputation, his entire future depended on this marriage. If it turned out the bride had kept such a massive secret from him, how could they possibly move forward? The billionaire father, sensing the situation spiraling out of control, tried to regain authority. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked. "We're not going to let some random person destroy our family. Guards, remove him immediately." Two security guards moved toward the young man, but he stood his ground, clutching the baby protectively. "No," the bride suddenly cried out, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Everyone froze, turning to look at her. Tears streamed down her face as she took a step forward. "Wait," she whispered, barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. Then louder, "Let me talk to him." Her father opened his mouth to protest, but the bride held up a hand, silencing him. For the first time in her life, she stood up to him, refusing to let him dictate what happened next. She gestured for the young man to follow her, and without waiting for permission, She walked toward a private room off the main hall. The young man hesitated for a moment, then followed, still holding the baby close to his chest. As the door closed behind them, leaving the stunned guests outside, the atmosphere in the room shifted. People exchanged glances, unsure of what to do or say. Some began speculating about whether the claims were true, while others whispered about canceling the wedding altogether. The once happy celebration had turned into a scene of uncertainty and drama, with no clear resolution in sight. Inside the private room, the bride sank into a chair, her head in her hands. The young man stood awkwardly by the door, shifting the baby gently in his arms. Neither spoke for a long moment, the weight of the situation hanging heavily in the air. Finally, the bride looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with confusion and pain. "Tell me everything," she said softly. "Start from the beginning." And so the young man began recounting their story, not just the happy moments but the struggles too. He talked about how they had met, how they had fallen in love, and how her sudden disappearance had left him devastated. He described the challenges of raising their son alone, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, and the constant worry about providing for a child without any help. As he spoke, the bride listened intently, her expression shifting from disbelief to sorrow. When he finished, the room fell silent again. The bride sat motionless, processing everything she had heard. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen." The young man sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. "I know you didn't plan for this," he said, gently. "But the fact is he's here now, and he deserves to know both his parents." At that moment, the baby stirred in his arms, letting out a soft coo. The sound broke the tension, drawing the bride's attention to the little face peeking out from the blanket. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took the baby into her own arms for the first time. As she cradled him, looking into his wide, curious eyes, something inside her shifted. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, there was no denying the resemblance. This was her child. For the first time since the chaos began, the bride allowed herself to feel not just the shock and guilt, but also a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected turn of events could lead to something beautiful. As the bride held the baby in her arms, time seemed to stand still. The room was quiet except for the soft sounds of the child breathing and occasionally cooing. She stared at his tiny face, taking in every detail. The curve of his cheeks, the way his little fingers curled around hers, the brightness in his eyes that seemed to mirror her own. It was surreal, almost dreamlike. This wasn't just any baby, this was her baby. Her heart ached with emotions she couldn't fully process: guilt, wonder, fear, and something else she hadn't felt in years: love. The young man watched her closely, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. He had fought hard to get here to make sure their son wouldn't grow up without knowing his mother. But now that they were finally face to face, he felt vulnerable in a way he hadn't expected. What if she rejected them? What if she walked away and left him to handle everything on his own again? Still, he tried to stay calm, letting her take her time. After what felt like forever, the bride finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's perfect." Her words hung in the air, raw and honest. She looked up at the young man, tears streaming down her face. "How did you do it? How did you raise him all by yourself?" The young man sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. He pulled up a chair and sat across from her, the weight of his journey evident in his tired eyes. "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "There were days when I didn't know how I'd keep going. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to make ends meet. Nights were the hardest. He'd cry and I'd feel so helpless because I couldn't give him everything he deserved." She listened intently, her grip tightening slightly on the baby as if afraid he might slip away. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked softly, her voice cracking. If you knew where I was, why didn't you reach out sooner? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken pain. The young man hesitated before answering, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to, he said finally. But after you disappeared, I figured you had your reasons. Maybe you thought I wouldn't understand, or maybe you were scared of what your family would say. Either way, I didn't want to force you into something you weren't ready for. So I waited, hoping someday you'd come back. His honesty hit her like a punch to the gut. She remembered those days vividly. The pressure from her father to focus only on her studies, the shame she felt when she realized she was pregnant, the overwhelming fear of failure. She had convinced herself that leaving was the best option, not just for her but for the baby too. If she stayed, she reasoned, she'd only drag him down. But now, holding her son for the first time, she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. I never meant to hurt you, or him. I thought I was doing the right thing. The young man nodded slowly, acknowledging her apology, even though it couldn't undo the pastor. I know, he said simply. But we can't change what happened. All we can do is figure out what happens next, for him. She looked down at the baby again, brushing a finger gently against his cheek. What happens next? She repeated softly, as if testing the phrase. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think beyond her carefully planned future. Up until now, her life had been dictated by expectations, her father's, society's, even her own. But staring into the face of this innocent child, she realized none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was giving him the love and stability he deserved. Outside the private room, the chaos hadn't died down. Guests milled about, some leaving in disgust, others lingering out of morbid curiosity. The billionaire father paced angrily, muttering under his breath about lawsuits and scandal. The groom-to-be stood off to the side, visibly conflicted. He cared deeply for the bride, but the revelation of a child changed everything. Could he really step into a role he hadn't signed up for? Would he be able to forgive her for keeping such a monumental secret? Meanwhile, the bride's closest friend, who had been part of her inner circle since childhood, slipped away from the crowd and knocked lightly on the door of the private room. When the bride opened it, her friend stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Are you okay? She asked gently, her concern evident. The bride shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know what to do, she confessed. Everything feels like it's falling apart. Her friend pulled up a chair and sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Listen, she said firmly but kindly. This isn't the end of the world. Yes, it's messy, and yes, people are going to talk. But right now, none of that matters. What matters is this little guy. She gestured toward the baby who was peacefully sleeping in the bride's arms. He needs you, and whether you realize it or not, you need him too. The bride swallowed hard, nodding slowly. She glanced at the young man who gave her an encouraging smile despite the exhaustion etched on his face. She's right, he said quietly. We'll figure it out together, for him. For the first time since the wedding ceremony began, the bride felt a glimmer of clarity. She didn't have all the answers, and she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But one thing was certain, she couldn't turn her back on her child. Not again. Whatever happened next, she vowed to put him first. As the hours ticked by, the bride made a decision. She excused herself from the private room long enough to address the guests who remained. Standing at the top of the stairs leading into the grand hall, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Thank you all for coming today, she began. I know many of you came expecting a celebration, and instead, you've witnessed something unexpected. To be honest, I'm still processing everything myself. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But one thing I know for sure is that my priorities have changed. Today isn't about me anymore. It's about my son. I need time to sort things out, and I ask for your understanding and patience as I navigate this new chapter of my life. With that, she turned and walked back toward the private room, leaving behind stunned silence. Some guests applauded softly, moved by her courage, while others muttered disapprovingly. But none of that mattered to her anymore. As she rejoined the young man and their sleeping baby, she felt a strange sense of peace, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Together they began discussing what lay ahead. They agreed to start with a DNA test to confirm paternity officially, though neither doubted the truth. Beyond that, they talked about co-parenting arrangements, financial responsibilities, and how to introduce the baby to the world without exposing him to unnecessary scrutiny. It was a daunting conversation filled with uncertainty, but they faced it together, united by their shared goal of giving their son the best possible future. By the time night fell, the once lavish wedding venue had emptied out. The decorations that had been meticulously arranged were now packed away, and the staff moved quietly to clean up the remnants of a day no one would soon forget. Inside the private room, however, a new story was just beginning, one centered not on wealth or status but on love, resilience, and second chances. The days following the wedding that wasn't were anything but ordinary. The story had spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers from guests who couldn't resist sharing the dramatic twist. Social media buzzed with speculation, and tabloids plastered headlines across their front pages: "Billionaire heiress's secret child revealed," or "Wedding drama, love, lies, and a baby." The bride, once celebrated for her grace and charm, now found herself at the center of a media storm. Reporters camped outside her family's estate, eager to capture any glimpse of her or the mysterious young man who had turned her world upside down. Inside the mansion, tension simmered like a pot about to boil over. Her father was livid, pacing back and forth in his study while ranting about betrayal and scandal. "This is not how things are done," he shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. "We're a respectable family, not some soap opera cast. Do you understand what this will do to our reputation? To my reputation?" The bride sat quietly in a corner of the room, cradling her son as if shielding him from the chaos around them. She didn't argue with her father. She knew it wouldn't help. Instead, she focused on the warmth of the baby in her arms, grounding herself in the present moment. Every time she looked at him, she felt a mix of guilt and awe. How could someone so small hold so much power to change everything? Her father eventually turned his attention to the young man, who had reluctantly agreed to stay nearby until they sorted things out. "You," he spat, pointing an accusatory finger. "This is all your fault. You think you can just show up here with some sob story and ruin my daughter's life?" The young man stood his ground, though his hands trembled slightly. "I didn't come here to ruin anyone's life," he said firmly. "I came because I wanted my son to know his mother. That's it. If you'd rather throw money at me and pretend none of this happened, fine. But that doesn't erase the truth." The billionaire sneered, dismissing the idea with a wave of his hand. "Money solves problems," he snapped. "And trust me, we have plenty of it. Name your price and we'll make sure you disappear from our lives forever." For a moment, silence filled the room. The bride's eyes widened in disbelief. Was her father really suggesting they buy off the young man and move on as if nothing had happened? Before she could respond, the young man stepped forward, his voice rising with emotion. "You think this is about money?" he asked, incredulous. "This isn't some business deal you can negotiate. This is about a child, a living, breathing human being, your grandson, and no amount of cash will ever replace what he needs most, his parents." The word struck a chord, not just with the bride but also with her mother, who had been silently observing the scene unfold. Until now, she had stayed in the background, overwhelmed by the shock of it all. But hearing the young man speak so passionately stirred something deep within her. She stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her husband's arm. Maybe we should listen to him," she said softly. "He's right. Money won't fix this. Our granddaughter, our grandchild, deserves better." Her father shot, her glare clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Stay out of this," he growled. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. For the first time, Cracks began to form in his ironclad resolve. Meanwhile, the groom-to-be wrestled with his own emotions. He had always envisioned a life with the bride, a partnership built on trust, love, and shared dreams. But now, faced with the reality of a child he hadn't known existed, he questioned whether their relationship could survive. Could he truly step into the role of a father to another man's child? Would he be able to forgive her for keeping such a monumental secret? One evening, after hours of restless pacing, he finally confronted her. They met in the garden, away from prying eyes and microphones. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers, but neither noticed. Their minds were too consumed with the weight of the situation. "I need to know," he began, his voice strained. "Did you ever plan to tell me? Or would I have gone my whole life without knowing?" She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She owed him honesty, even if it hurt. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me thought I could leave that chapter of my life behind. I convinced myself it was better for everyone, including him, if I stayed away. But now?" She glanced toward the house where the baby slept peacefully under the watchful eye of her mother. "Now I see how wrong I was." He nodded slowly, processing her words. "I care about you," he said after a long pause. "More than I've cared about anyone else. But this changes everything. I can't ignore it, and I can't pretend it doesn't matter. I need time to think, to decide if I can handle this." She understood, even if it broke her heart. "Take all the time you need," she replied softly. "But please remember, this isn't just about us anymore. It's about him." As the days passed, the bride found herself caught between two worlds: the privileged life she had always known and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Her father continued to push for a quick resolution, offering the young man increasingly larger sums of money in exchange for his silence. But the young man refused every offer, standing firm in his belief that their son deserved more than a financial settlement. "You're missing the point," he told the billionaire during one heated argument. "This isn't about revenge or greed. It's about doing what's best for Elijah. He deserves to grow up knowing both of us, not just as providers, but as parents." The word Elijah hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The bride had chosen the name herself when she first held him earlier that week. It meant, "God is my strength," and it felt fitting given the circumstances. Hearing it spoken aloud reminded everyone involved of the tiny life at the center of the drama. Eventually, the DNA test results arrived, confirming what everyone already suspected. Elijah was indeed the bride's biological child. With proof undeniable, the bride made a decision that shocked her family and herself. She announced that she would sever ties with her father unless he agreed to support her choice to co-parent with the young man. It was a bold move, one that risked alienating her from the only life she had ever known. But she realized that staying true to her values was more important than clinging to wealth or status. Her father exploded in anger, accusing her of betrayal and selfishness. "You're throwing away everything we've worked for," he roared. "For what? A mistake you made years ago?" "It's not a mistake," she shot back, surprising even herself with her defiance. "Elijah is my son and I love him. I won't let anyone take that away from me, not even you." Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, but her voice remained steady. For the first time in her life, she stood up to her father, refusing to let fear dictate her choices. Her mother watched silently, torn between loyalty to her husband and admiration for her daughter's courage. In the end, the groom-to-be made his decision. After days of soul-searching, he called off the wedding, citing irreconcilable differences. "I wish you happiness," he told her sincerely, "but I can't be the person you need right now. Not with everything that's happened." His departure left a void in her heart, but it also cleared the way for a new beginning. The bride reached out to the young man, asking if they could work together to raise Elijah. To her relief, he agreed, recognizing that their son needed both parents in his life. Together, they vowed to create a stable, loving environment for Elijah, regardless of the challenges ahead. As weeks turned into months, the media frenzy died down, replaced by quieter moments of reflection. The bride learned to balance her responsibilities as a mother with the demands of rebuilding her life. The young man continued working tirelessly, grateful for the chance to share parenting duties with her. And though the road ahead was far from easy, they faced it together, united by their shared goal of giving Elijah the best possible future. 2.5 max months had passed since the wedding that never was, and life for the bride and the young man had transformed in ways neither of them could have imagined. The media circus eventually died down, but the ripple effects of that day lingered in their lives. Every morning brought new challenges, yet it also carried moments of unexpected joy, moments they never thought possible when they first stood face to face at the altar. For the bride, waking up each day felt surreal. Gone were the days of luxury cars pulling up to chauffeur her around or assistants managing every detail of her schedule. Now she lived in a modest apartment closer to the young man's neighborhood, a decision she made to ensure Elijah grew up in a stable environment with both parents present. At first, adjusting to this simpler lifestyle wasn't easy. She missed the comfort of her old life, the spacious rooms, the designer clothes, the endless privileges money could buy. But as time went on, she realized something profound. None of those things mattered as much as being there for her son. Elijah was growing fast, his personality blossoming with each passing week. His laughter filled the small apartment, turning even mundane tasks like folding laundry or washing dishes into joyful experiences. The bride found herself marveling at how one tiny human could bring so much light into her world. There were tough days, of course. Sleepless nights when Elijah cried inconsolably, or moments when she doubted whether she was doing enough. But through it all, she clung to the belief that love would guide her. The young man, too, embraced this new chapter with determination. He continued working long hours at his job, often juggling multiple shifts to make ends meet. But despite the exhaustion, he made sure to carve out time for Elijah. On weekends, he'd take the baby to the park, letting him crawl on the grass while pointing out birds and trees. Sometimes he'd sing softly to Elijah during late-night feedings, his voice soothing and steady. These quiet moments reminded him why he had fought so hard to be part of his son's life. Their co-parenting arrangement wasn't without its struggles. They came from vastly different worlds, and their approaches to parenting sometimes clashed. The bride had grown up surrounded by wealth and privilege, where problems were often solved with resources rather than patience. The young man, on the other hand, knew what it meant to scrape by and rely on grit and resilience. Bridging that gap required compromise and lots of communication. One evening, after putting Elijah to bed, they sat together on the couch, sipping cups of tea. "I've been thinking," the young man said slowly, breaking the comfortable silence. "We should start planning for Elijah's future. School, activities, all of that." The bride nodded, setting her cup down. "I agree," she replied, "but I'm not sure where to begin. I don't want to overwhelm him or us with too many plans." He smiled faintly, leaning back against the cushions. "We'll figure it out step by step. For now, let's focus on making sure he feels loved and safe. Everything else will fall into place." Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "You're right," she said quietly. "And honestly, I couldn't do this without you. Raising Elijah, it's harder than anything I've ever done. But seeing him smile makes it worth it." The young man chuckled lightly. "Tell me about it. Some days I wonder if I'm cut out for this whole parenting thing." Then he looks at me with those big eyes, and suddenly, everything feels okay. They shared a laugh, the kind born out of mutual understanding and shared hardship. In that moment, they weren't just two people thrown together by circumstance. They were teammates united by their love for their child. Meanwhile, the bride's relationship with her family remained strained. Her father refused to accept her decision to leave behind the lavish lifestyle he had built for her. "You're throwing away your future," he shouted during one particularly heated phone call. "Do you think raising a child will bring you happiness? It's a burden, nothing more." His words stung, but she didn't back down. "Elijah isn't a burden," she shot back, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. He's my son, and I'll do whatever it takes to give him the best life possible, even if it means walking away from you." After hanging up, she allowed herself a few tears, leaning against the wall for support. It hurt to lose her father's approval. But deep down, she knew she had made the right choice. Her mother, however, reached out occasionally, sending messages of encouragement and love. Though she couldn't openly defy her husband, she found subtle ways to show her daughter that she supported her decision. As for the groom-to-be, he faded into the background of her life. Occasionally, she wondered what he was doing, hoping he had found peace after their breakup. She still cared about him deeply, but she understood that their paths had diverged for good reasons. Love wasn't always enough, not when it came to building a family under such complicated circumstances. Despite the challenges, there were glimpses of hope. One afternoon, while shopping for groceries, the bride bumped into an old friend who had attended the ill-fated wedding. Instead of judgment or pity, the friend greeted her warmly, asking how she and Elijah were doing. "Life doesn't always go as planned," the friend said with a knowing smile. "But sometimes, the unexpected turns out to be exactly what we needed." Those words stayed with the bride long after their conversation ended. They reminded her that even though her journey hadn't followed the script she once envisioned, it had led her to something far greater. A sense of purpose, a deeper connection to her son, and a newfound strength within herself. Back home, Elijah babbled happily in his playpen, reaching for colorful blocks scattered across the floor. The bride knelt beside him, helping him stack the blocks one by one. When the tower finally tumbled over, he erupted into giggles, clapping his hands with delight. Watching him, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Yes, life was messy and unpredictable, but it was also beautiful, full of tiny miracles, waiting to be discovered. In those fleeting moments, she realized something important. Redemption wasn't about erasing past mistakes or fixing everything that had gone wrong. It was about moving forward with courage, embracing the lessons learned along the way, and finding joy in the present. And as she looked at her son's radiant smile, she knew one thing for certain. No matter what lay ahead, she was ready to face it, for him. Years passed, and the memory of that chaotic wedding day faded into the background of their lives. What remained was a story of growth, resilience, and love. A story written not in headlines or scandals, but in the quiet moments shared between a mother, a father, and their son. Elijah grew from a tiny baby into a curious toddler, then into a bright, energetic child who brought light to everyone around him. His laughter echoed through their modest home, filling it with warmth and joy. And though life wasn't always easy, it was rich in ways neither parent had anticipated. The bride, now a mother fully devoted to her role, found herself transformed by the experience. She no longer craved the luxuries of her old life, the fancy clothes, the extravagant parties, the endless attention. Instead, she cherished simpler pleasures, watching Elijah take his first steps, teaching him how to count, reading bedtime stories until they both fell asleep on the couch. These were the moments that mattered most, the ones that made her heart swell with pride and gratitude. The young man, too, evolved in ways he hadn't expected. Gone was the uncertainty that once weighed heavily on his shoulders. He walked taller now, more confident in his ability to provide for his family, not just financially, but emotionally. He learned to balance work with parenting, finding time to play catch with Elijah in the park or help him practice drawing shapes at the kitchen table. Every milestone Elijah reached felt like a victory, proof that their sacrifices weren't in vain. As Elijah grew older, he began asking questions about his family. Why he didn't have grandparents like some of his friends, why his parents lived separately but still spent so much time together. The bride and the young man answered honestly, explaining that families come in all shapes and sizes, and that what truly mattered was love. They showed him pictures from the past, including faded photos of happier times before the chaos erupted. Elijah listened intently, piecing together the puzzle of his own story. Though he couldn't fully grasp the complexity of their journey, he understood one thing clearly. He was loved deeply by both his parents, Their relationship, forged in adversity, became stronger over time. It wasn't perfect. They still argued occasionally, disagreeing on discipline methods or financial priorities. But they always found a way to resolve their differences. They learned to lean on each other during tough times, whether it was dealing with school issues, navigating health concerns, or simply managing the daily grind of raising a child. Together, they built something solid, something real. The billionaire father, however, struggled to reconcile with his daughter's choices. At first, he refused to acknowledge Elijah's existence, dismissing him as a mistake born out of poor judgment. But as time went on, curiosity got the better of him. Secretly, he followed updates about his grandson through social media posts shared by distant relatives. Pictures of Elijah playing soccer, celebrating birthdays, and posing proudly with school awards tugged at his heartstrings in ways he couldn't ignore. One day, unable to resist any longer, he decided to visit. He arrived unannounced, standing nervously outside the apartment door, clutching a gift-wrapped box. When the bride opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of years of silence hanging between them. Finally, he cleared his throat and said gruffly, I wanted to see him." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Inside, Elijah sat on the floor, building a tower with colorful blocks. He looked up curiously at the stranger, tilting his head as if trying to place him. The billionaire knelt awkwardly, holding out the gift. "This is for you," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. Elijah accepted the present eagerly, tearing off the wrapping paper to reveal a toy car. His face lit up with delight and he exclaimed, "Thank you," before running off to show his mom. Watching this exchange, the billionaire felt a lump rise in his throat. For the first time in years, he realized what he had been missing, not just the chance to know his grandson, but also the opportunity to reconnect with his daughter. Over time, their relationship slowly began to mend. It wasn't immediate or without tension, but small gestures, a phone call here, a shared meal there, helped bridge the gap. The bride saw glimpses of the man her father used to be before ambition hardened him, and he, in turn, discovered a side of his daughter he had never truly known. Her strength, her compassion, her unwavering dedication to her son. As for the groom-to-be, he eventually moved on, finding happiness with someone new. Though he and the bride remained cordial, their paths rarely crossed. Still, she often thought of him fondly, grateful for the lessons their brief relationship had taught her about forgiveness, compromise, and self-awareness. Looking back on everything they had been through, the bride sometimes marveled at how far they had come, from the scandalous headlines to the sleepless nights, from the heated arguments to the tender hugs. Every step of their journey had shaped them into the people they were today. They weren't the same individuals who stood frozen at that altar years ago. They were wiser, braver, and more resilient. On Elijah's 5th birthday, they threw a small party at the park, inviting close friends and neighbors. As balloons swayed gently in the breeze and children laughed while chasing each other around, the bride caught sight of the young man pushing Elijah on a swing. Their son squealed with delight, begging to go higher, and the young man chuckled, obliging with a gentle push. In that moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Life hadn't turned out the way she had planned, but it had given her something far greater, a family built on love, trust, and second chances. When the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the sky, the bride called everyone together for cake. As they sang happy birthday to Elijah, she glanced around at the faces gathered there, the young man, her mother, even her father, and smiled. This was her world now. Imperfect yet beautiful, messy yet meaningful. And as she watched Elijah blow out the candles, she whispered a silent thank you for the challenges that had strengthened her, for the love that had saved her, and for the little boy who had changed everything.